Well, now I would like to just go back a bit to what actually David presented in the beginning by presenting some of the data about the urbanization trends in Europe in general. And what it was raised at, well, and what also Erblin and Giancarlo highlighted in our super project for Lithuania, is that Lithuania is actually quite unurbanized compared to like other countries, right? So I would like to raise that question maybe to Giancarlo and just ask like why we should care, like why we should not just develop and go bonkers until 2050 and then say, okay, let's cut it off, you know, because we like 6% developed or something. So it's obviously a bit like a devilish question, but it's like why we should care and how we should convince general person on the ground who has maybe some land and he wants to convert the land use and then, you know, build some six single family houses, why he should care.
Thank you. That's an interesting question. And I like also the way it is posed and the way it pushes people to think. My feeling is that there are two questions in yours. One is why we should care in general. And I think this is implicit in the idea of sustainable or unsustainable development. Unsustainable development is more costly. And per definition is unsustainable in the long term. So it will lead to something that will not sustain anymore, and then it will lead to system collapse. But the system collapse is one thing that is far away, and maybe we think, okay, it's very far away. That's what you say before, why we should care before 2050. But the first point is more important. It's more costly to develop land in a way that we label unsustainable. Is more costly in the sense that it costs more to provide services if they are far away, to develop larger infrastructure network, to urbanize an area that is not yet urbanized, and so on. I mean, it's more costly for the public sector, meaning in turn is more costly for the people that will have to pay taxes at a certain point. But I don't think this is an argument you can use. I mean, this is the why we should do that. It's not an argument you can really use to push the person that have a plot of land and would like to urbanize it, because then you will say, yeah, okay, more taxes in 20-year time will not really on the weight with the benefit I have in building my house now is nothing. So then you should make more expensive for him to develop that house. And this is how you make him understand that. In my opinion, is to touch the pocket of the people with the reforms, then you can actually make people somehow understand that this is not what will happen. By this, how can you call it? It's not by forbidding something, is to make it more expensive, is to make it not profitable in relation to another choice that they could take. So why should I buy a house outside? Why should I buy a house outside when I can buy a house inside a densified area that is less expensive, because you put on the top of the house on the top of the cost of the house outside, like higher taxes in the construction, and therefore the price rise. Yeah. So by acting on those things, I would say you could manage to persuade people on what is more convenient. After all, it's a political choice to go in one direction or another. And therefore is a political responsibility of those that are democratically elected and therefore entitled to take political decision to push instruments and devices, use instruments and devices to push behavior of the people in one way or another. I think it is in the political responsibility of the person that are democratically elected to steer specific phenomena like urbanization on the ground. So if it is why we should go for that, I think because unsustainable development is really unsustainable, and why people should behave in a specific way and disregarding their own immediate benefit is because political decision and technical devices attached to them push them to do that by touching concretely their benefit.
And Giancarlo, I see Anton wants to react, I think, to your statements. So perhaps.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Actually, I would like to add. Obviously, that's one part, that's a political and at some point it's quite a technical decision, right? You just understand that building infrastructure in unsustainable areas, in the areas which are less dense, it's so expensive, and it's so expensive not only to build but to maintain as well, and so on and so forth. So that's one part of the thing. But I think that another, and that's also a political, but I think it's important not to forget the quality of what people want, and kind of also educating what people as well. It's a very long-term play and long-term game. But the thing is that in our Western societies, people are more individualistic. They want to live more in a more kind of in a better quality, in a better environment, in smaller houses or in smaller communities and so on. So we also have to think about the quality what we build in the dense areas as well, and that's a big challenge to balance. I think so. That the thing is that we the elected people, they also know that thing, that some people really want to live more individualistically, and we have not to forget that, and not to be very only technical in saying, yeah, you be happy in this 12-story building and group and so on and so forth. So we as a city have to balance that, and also find ways to bring the money where most of the taxpayers are, and improve the quality as well. So that's a lot of interconnected issues. So just to add up. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. And I see David probably also wants to react to that. I just also want to bring another question that, David, maybe you can follow up as well, is you spoke about, the typologies, sort of the urbanization forms that you discussed in the super project, right? Like the polycentric, dense, or diffuse, and etc. So, for example, in Lithuania, we have some declining regions, right? So they're really happy if some families come and they allow them to build wherever they want. Just come, stay, pay taxes to local government, right? Should there be on like different regions in, let's say, a country who runs, let's say, sustainability strategy for development and etc. Should these like allow for diffuse strategy in one municipality, polycentric strategy in another municipality, dense strategy in Vilnius, and etc. Or should that be more of a national, let's say nationally decided, like how we want to do things, or should that be up for local governments in your mind or experience, let's say?
Well, I guess the short answer is it's up to the Lithuanians themselves, because depending on how their state structure it is, you have to be democratic about this. And if it's, let's say, right now organized that the localities are the ones who have important decision-making power, then it should be a local discussion. That doesn't mean that you should say we all go for diffuse development, because there's also many pros and cons for each type of development, and you have to bring all these into view. And for example, the infrastructure calculator in Austria, that might be one way of doing this, that to talk about the discussion, then you say, hey, let's try to get more people in our municipality, for example. Okay, fine, but how should they live? Should we create a nice livable village that's also walkable, and we can take some of the money that we would use on infrastructure to build a road all the way out there and dispersive services? Should we take that and put it into amenities and have a bit of a more compact village structure? And you could have a discussion about this where you take all these things on board. So I would say it's not necessarily the case that if you let people choose themselves, that's all going to be dispersed. It will many times be that way if you don't take any decisions at all and don't have a discussion at all, because then every individual decides for themselves and doesn't think about the others. But if you have a local discussion, maybe you can come to the decision that no, maybe a little local compact development is the best way for our community forward. And we can also attract people with a little, let's say, quite ecological community, which works well on different levels. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think also maybe going to a bit opposite direction. I see, although Volka wants to react probably to what David said. So Volka, please.
Yeah, I think here in Germany we have both. We have regions which losing population and try to get new population in, also paying money for families to build houses in their villages. And on the other side, we have this target regions actually of migration, the big centers, which grow and grow and grow. And in the COVID pandemic now, the trend to live outside the city increases dramatically. And because if you are in quarantine in the city and you can leave your flat for 2 weeks, this is not that nice actually. And if you have a family, this is getting a nervous breakdown in case. And that's why a lot of people actually decide to leave the city and go to the countryside. But it is in the first circle around the city, it is that expensive that you go to the second circle around the cities. And in this way, actually, the cities grow into the countryside. And the government still pays money for daily commuting. You get a tax reduction of 50 cents a kilometer for daily commuting. And as long as those mechanisms do exist, the people go to the countryside. And in cases of quite expensive living, each 10 kilometers outside the city saves you maybe 50,000 euro in construction costs. And this is what's driving the cities in the country.
Thank you, Volker. I think this question in the comments by, I'm afraid to pronounce it wrong, but I think Tiana Dabovic may also relate to what we're discussing now is, I appreciate calls for political accountability. However, in some countries, politicians are being highly motivated to initiate and support infrastructure construction by being corrupted by private companies, which are constructing them. Is there a solution planners can propose to such practices? Thank you. Perhaps someone could comment on this question as well.
I see
try. Giancarlo. Yes.
Yeah. I can try. I have my own personal view on that. I think it's a personal answer we can propose to this question. I really like it. I really understand there is an issue there. But in my opinion, planners have a technical responsibility of providing the device that should implement, should make land on the ground political decision taken by the people that are accountable and legitimate to take those decisions. And therefore, they may have a role in discussing with the people that take decision and trying to, let's say, make them change their mind or slightly or less slightly and so on. But in the end of the day, the responsibility is technical, in my opinion. A planner is not voted by anyone to take a decision on one type of development or the other. They can argue in favor of a specific type of development when discussing this with the people that are entitled to take decision, but they are not legitimate to take the political responsibility of this decision. And therefore, if there is an issue in which a specific political elite is aiming to go towards a model of development that is not sustainable, then planners cannot do that much, in my opinion, in that sense. They can propose specific instruments and devices, but if the decision is to allow to build as much as possible and wherever people have the money to develop and the land to develop, then it's very difficult for planners to make a difference in this concern. I wanted, however, to comment also on the other question and the point that was made in relation to COVID, pre-COVID, post-COVID, and the quest for houses and for living outside main dance center, which of course our project was developed beforehand, so we really didn't have the chance to reflect and to look for instruments in the during and post-COVID phase. But I did personally some research on that, and it is true that there is this sake of places outside main cities, but this doesn't necessarily mean that such a decision would entail more building like right outside main centers. If well piloted and let's say stimulated, it may lead to a revival of other centers that are not like in the sprawled area outside cities, like a policy of that would support the like how can I say it? Like enhancing services in small municipalities, like for instance, mountain area or remote countryside area, would lead to the further densification of those areas, to the further development of those areas, not necessarily in an unsustainable way, in my opinion. So I'm also seeing this idea of moving away from main dense centers to go to countryside area, but this is not necessarily unsustainable. Actually, it may be sustainable in the sense that it may lead to further development of countryside municipalities in a sustainable way, if appropriately accompanied by public policies that, for instance, would lead to services to allow living and working there, and not just living there and commuting to main centers every day to work. It's a national strategy for inner area in Italy is one example of that, but there are others, like supporting with public resources and possibly EU cohesion policy may be there for that, the enhancement of livability, quality of life in these small centers.
Thank you, Giancarlo. I see Erblin perhaps wants to comment as well on that.
Yes, exactly. Just to add something about what Giancarlo said, that something is happening in my region when I'm living here. During the period of COVID, they decided to invest 10 million euro to convince young people to move from city centers towards these borgo in the mountain areas, which are beautiful places. They have internet connection, etc., but they can stay there without moving every day, without commuting, etc. So the COVID is somehow changing also political agenda in some cases. It depends, I think, on the situation, specific situation, and the possibility to dedicate funds. So something is happening without building new houses, just using and reconverting what we have now. That's just my opinion.
Thank you, Erblin. As well as to comment on this sort of political ambition and planners' powers, let's say, what we actually experience in the ministry, and when we discuss with like chief municipality architects and etc., we often hear that it's actually sometimes it's really hard to align the visions of planners and the political parties or political leaders. However, we also notice that the strong leadership in planners and their sort of ability to communicate the right message to political leaders are very important. And if that can be aligned, it can create actually really strong administrations that can actually have really good visions. Obviously, how to do that, it's a bit easier said than done. Just to go back a little, what also Erblin discussed in our spin-off project, he highlighted also the idea of degrowth, and that some regions experiencing this massive degrowth, and how to deal with that. And the question is, do we just convert these brownfields to greenfields now? How we do approach that? Are there any good examples dealing with that, or we just try to like flush money in there and try to maintain them and recover those regions? What are there any good examples for this kind of management? I see nobody would like to comment on this question, so perhaps the super project did not particularly investigate the idea of degrowth, I guess. So maybe a thing to think about for the future. However, Giancarlo.
Can I say something? It's not more. It's not on degrowth really, but it's on. I mean, okay, we can call it degrowth in terms of zoning territory in a way that allow less building quantity than the previous plans. And this is something that happens now naturally during the economic crisis in quite a lot of Italian municipalities, for instance. In Italy, there was a trend. I mean, municipalities are zoning their land and allowing specific quantities of cubic meters of land. And since World War II onwards, each plan that is approved is almost or always, I would say, allowing more quantity than the previous one. Yeah. This trend was never inverted. It was like that until the economic crisis of 2008, the stroke in Italy a bit later. Starting from 2010, what happened is that in specific municipalities, people with owning land, with building quantities allowed on that, they started to go to municipality and say, please take it away from us because we pay taxes. Because a land that is buildable, you pay more taxes on it than on a land that is only agricultural, but they didn't have the money to build. So basically, for the first time in history, variation to the plan were made in a way that allow less building quantity. So a sort of degrowth perspective, I would say. And these happen in many places in the countries and the mountain area where investments were not profitable anymore. And therefore, people prefer to keep their money in their pocket or in the bank instead of investing them on building. While throughout the previous 50 years, every time an owner has a piece of land and resources to develop it, it was by default that he invested in developing and then to rent or to sell this property. So the market itself can lead to this like degrowth phenomena when so market dynamics, this driver that David was mentioning. And to attach to that one of our case study that Erblin know even more than me and maybe can add on that, the case study of the Union of Municipality of Bassa Romagna in Italy is one good example of that, because each municipality is responsible to zone its land, but municipality can join into an intermunicipal zoning plan. And by doing that, basically what they did is to choose together what could be the best location for specific activity. And in order to make this agreement between municipality possible, they introduced a device that redistribute the benefit of this localization. So to put, I don't know, an industrial complex or a commercial complex in municipality A instead of municipality B was not a problem for municipality B, because they would anyway get the benefit in terms of revenues and so on of this localization. So it was a way to plan at a bit higher scale in a way that it was more rational in relation to the conformation of land uses on the ground. And this somehow, if you take the final result, led to a zoning of less building quantities on the ground in a sort of degrowth perspective, I would say. It's not really degrowth, but it's a limited, a more limited growth. I don't know if I was clear.
Yes, absolutely, Giancarlo. Okay, so we can perhaps go almost to the two main questions of this seminar, because I think we have like 5 minutes left. But just to ask a last question, maybe for David also. You discussed in Super, obviously, the ideas of densification and containment. And I think in Netherlands, the densification strategy is probably more predominantly used, right, rather than containment, in terms of that you can't really acquire new land for development in Netherlands. It seems like it's really difficult. So you kind of live in the future almost, like compared to other countries, I would say. So perhaps you can give some ideas how what are lessons learned thus far in terms of having a huge constraints in sort of new land acquisition for developments, as well as how public perceives the topic of this densification, because I think in Lithuania and perhaps in other countries, it's sometimes really hard to have public support for this densification, especially in city centers, where it seems like there's more pressure placed on sort of ecological aspects in living in urban environments, right? Because if you want to densify, you usually have to acquire some land that is maybe dominated by some, green field or whatnot. So perhaps you have some comment on that, and then we can just go to the main questions of our seminar today.
Thank you for that question. I wouldn't say that the Netherlands is not doing containment. I see these as two strategies which you can apply to any country, including the Netherlands. And what we mean by densification is looking at the areas which are already urbanized and seeing if we can urbanize that even more somehow, that we can increase the densities. By containment, what we mean is if you take the borders of that urban area, which are usually green areas, and set them off limits and say you can't develop onto those somehow. So even in a highly urbanized country like the Netherlands, 70% of the land use is still agricultural. So there's lots of room for containment. And we do have a lot of containment also because, as you know, we're very heavily planned. There's lots of regulations. And if you look around Amsterdam, where I live, there's UNESCO heritage sites which you can't touch. There's some Natura 2000 sites which you can't touch, and some other green areas which are just and that's containment. And those are strategies. And the national government had imposed buffer zones between cities so they couldn't run into each other, and a green heart. Those were abolished. So now we're having a bit more freedom. So it's always, I think planners have to use both tools. So the densification strategy, I see also as a very positive strategy. So people might think, oh, densification, it sounds bad. I don't want to live in a dense city. But you also can stress the positive aspects of this, and that's the higher services. You can also many times show people what it looks like. Many people actually like to live in some urban neighborhoods with a large amount of density if it looks good, if there are a lot of trees, if it's walkable, things like that. Those are many of the most popular neighborhoods in cities are quite dense. So if you see this as a model and say, well, maybe we're striving for development more like, and then you mention a popular neighborhood, maybe the public might not think that's such a bad idea. So yes, you will have to change your lifestyle a bit, or there's a different type of lifestyle, but those are many times very popular things. So in the Netherlands, what we're seeing is the market's already driving in this area. Those cities our cities are under intense development pressure and also for densification. And so what we're thinking, if we had left it up to the market completely, we wouldn't have any green spaces left in cities. So what we're really trying to do as planners is to see that how can we increase density, but also not sacrifice, let's say, green spaces. So for example, removing car parking spaces or putting them underground and things like that. How can we be a bit more smart about how we use our land and increase the densities, but don't sacrifice the livability? And that's a puzzle, but that's exactly why urban designers and planners are here, is to solve those kinds of puzzles. So I think, long story short, both of these strategies, densification and containment, they help each other. They're complementary. And I think both of them are useful tools for planners.
Thank you, David. Thank you. So perhaps we can just have short comments on our main debate questions. So what kind of interventions have proven effective in promoting sustainable urbanization? And perhaps we can just connect the two questions and say what those interventions at national level perhaps are useful, and what are the key points that policymakers and decision makers should keep in mind when making national strategies and decisions, and as well on the local level. Perhaps all of you can have a short comment on those, and then we'll leave for Giancarlo just to sum up as it is in our agenda presented. So maybe Erbelin, you can start with this. Two advices, one national level, one local, and we go.
Okay, I think that is a very complicated question because there is no one answer. Of course, there is no perfect instrument that can address the land use in all countries in the same way, etc., etc. But of course, at the national level, what decision and policymakers can do is to frame a long-term vision in order to put the land use at the topic of the agenda, and so to be clear on the indicators or on their volunteer in how to address the territory, I think. And as much as possible, these indicators should be monitored and evaluated periodically, because of course a strategy can be very vague, but in this case we need much more initiatives that can be measurable through time at a national level. For the local level, I think, well, it depends on the situation where we are, but cooperation or instruments that can increase cooperation instead of competition seems to work very well. The case of Bassa Romagna that Giancarlo mentioned before was exactly that. They decided at the political level to come together and to build one instrument for 9 municipalities. So first of all, it makes things more simple, because you have to deal with one plans and not 9. But at the same time, they avoided fiscal competition among municipalities. And this is the way to, also for the case of Lithuania in particular, to reduce this fragmentation, and also to have to benefit in terms of governing better land use development.
Thank you, Erbelin. Perhaps we go to Anton now. Some advice for national authorities and for local. So for us in this case.
Yeah. So well, as we all discussed, it's a very complex thing, you know, and then we have to tackle a lot of different kind of issues or challenges we face every day, and it's not only technical decisions, it's also political decisions. So kind of it's challenging both for us as a municipality, but I'm sure it's challenging for the national body as the ministry as well. But the thing is, I think Well, the main takeaway for me is usually that we have to talk and hear each other and kind of trust each other. That we we work on the very we working on a local level. We see the problems and we see where we can improve and do it quickly, and we are way quicker to make decisions and to improve things. So on the national level, we'd also like to do that. Because the challenges, even though they are are here for ages, basically, but the decisions, every minute we spend not making decision, it costs us money and time and lost opportunities to do better, so I think the main takeaway is to talk, to hear each other, and to trust each other. So that's the main thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Anton. Let's go to Volker now. Volker, perhaps some ideas and comments. Your microphone, sorry, your microphone is not on. Please, can you turn it on?
No. I think we cannot avoid actually to see cities growing, but I think it is necessary that in respect also in like a target like this 30-hectare target, there must be a political discussion on the balance of infrastructural costs, living conditions, housing prices, and whatever. And I think if people tend to live in the more or less city near countryside, there must be some infrastructural needs reflected. Commuting by car is not the best suitable thing. Actually, there should be also alternative transport thinking involved in this respect. But nevertheless, I think to be too restrictive might be not a suitable way, but you have to find a balance also to give people the opportunity to fulfill their ideas of living and living together.
Thank you, Volker. I appreciate that. And then we go to David, and then Giancarlo, please sum up.
Oh, I think everything's been said. I just wrote in the chat that I like the idea of the donut economy because almost everyone seems to know this, and then you can have a discussion about whether respects these ecological and social boundaries, and you can have a discussion about the common good. And I think that can maybe hopefully shift the logic a little bit from just how much money are we going to get from this particular development, or the kind of individualistic, very piecemeal development that we sometimes see. So yeah, I think I'm all for these kinds of metaphors and tools if it helps the public debate.
Thank you, David.